Li Bai presented to Meng Haoran. I love Master Meng, whose fame has travelled everywhere beneath heaven. In fresh-faced youth, he gave up the official cap and carriage. White-haired, he rests amid pines and clouds. Drunk beneath the moon, he often attains sagehood. Dazzled by flowers, he wishes to serve no lord. How can I aspire to climb such a high mountain? Humbly I bow to his pure spirit. So we're back with poems by Li Bai, which, as you all remember, is the second best represented poet in this anthology. In the section of pentasyllabic regulated poems, he has 5. Now, traditionally, Li Bai has a very big oeuvre that has been preserved. I mean, thousands of poems, I believe. And his forte, though, at least in the conventional view, is not in this type of poem. He is, if you will remember, the banished immortal, and it was believed that he excelled at poems that had little or less stringent metrical constraints than the regulated poems, especially the gushi, the old-style poems, and the ballads. But he is able to make regulated poems on demand, and quite effective ones at that. And in fact, this one and probably the third one, the fourth one that we will talk about are, pretty well known and anthologized pieces of his. Okie dokie. So, this poem is a presentation poem. Remember, one of the things that scholar officials did was exchange texts, poems, the ones with the others. And I think the background behind this poem is that Li Bai was in the south of China. He went to visit Meng Haoran in his native Xuanyang, I think, and he didn't find him there. So he left this poem to him as a gift. So the title is Presented to Meng Haoran. Others have translated this as a gift to Meng Haoran. I think we've already talked of the relationship between Li Bai and Meng Haoran, and previously we have seen some poems, I think we did see poems where Meng Haoran was directing himself to Li Bai, probably, or vice versa, or at least with Meng Haoran sending texts to other poets. By the way, Meng Haoran is one of the better represented poets in this anthology. He has 15 poems. So this is a typical exchange poem, yeah? And like most exchange poems in a very cultured society as traditional China was among the scholar officials, it falls a bit in the realm of flattery even. It sounds a bit hyperbolic in the praise that Li Bai seems to be devoting to Meng Haoran. Now, to understand the poem, we have to refresh our memories about the literary persona of Meng Haoran. You will remember Meng Haoran was a Haitang poet, as opposed to Li Bai and Du Fu. He's slightly older, probably a generation or so older, which means that Du Fu and Li Bai tended to look up at him as a sort of, slightly older poet of just the previous generation, like an older brother, perhaps. And Meng Haoran was not successful in his attempts at becoming a civil servant during his youth. This poem seems to imply that he didn't even try, but I would be skeptic of that statement. He passed the Jinshi examination when he was in his very late 30s, which was not so young in traditional China. Never really had any positions of importance. No, any positions for that matter, of importance or without importance. I think there's a legend that says that he was in very good relationships not only with Li Bai but also with Wang Wei. In fact, the style of Wang Wei's and Meng Haoran's poetry is usually contrasted because they're both native poets, in their best work. But I think, as we've commented before, Wang Wei tends to be more uh, uh, disembodied and more empty places of nature. Meng Haoran tends to emphasize a lived nature and the topics of retirement. So going back to Meng Haoran, he was not successful as a scholar official. I was saying there was a legend that says that Wang Wei tried to present him to the emperor. Meng Haoran read a poem in which he said one of the lines of the poem was something like, "The emperor only employs those who are smart." The emperor was alleged to have suspected that this was an ironic line, because Meng Haoran considered himself worthy and hadn't been recognized until then, and that was the excuse or the reason why Emperor Xuanzong never gave him an important position. In fact, the only post at which he served was under another of the poets we encountered, Zhang Jiulin, the chancellor. While the chancellor was in partial exile in the south of China, I think he employed in the governmental administration Meng Haoran for a short amount of time. So Meng Haoran paints himself as, in the line or in the stele of poets like Tao Qian, as a retired scholar official with Taoistic or inclinations, a poet, a person that is indifferent to power, to office, to worldly ambition. And that's precisely the type of picture we get in this poem. Li Bai seems to be offering an intense praise for this Master Meng, who is untroubled with ambition, with serving in the government, who only wants to attain truth and live the happy life, the Taoistic life of the person who is unbothered by wealth or riches or power or ambitions, earthly ambitions at least. Now, very interesting, Li Bai led this sort of life himself. He wasn't at all the example of a scholar official. He led this sort of life. We could say that Li Bai, nevertheless, was more this worldly and flamboyant. I mean, he worked for princes and patrons and received a lot of money, whereas Meng Haoran was, much more of a recluse. And part of this persona that he adopted, became his real persona as a poet that, hardly left his home region and, just dedicated himself to writing poetry and living the retired life and quelling whatever ambitions he might have had. So let's take a look at the poem. The topic of the poem, therefore, is praise for Master Meng, and because of the type of life and the type of person Master Meng is, praise for the retired life of the hermit who renounces the world and searches for the other good things: truth, ease, peacefulness. Let's go couplet by couplet as usual. So friendship would be a subtopic as well. I love Master Meng, whose fame has travelled everywhere beneath heaven. So the poem starts with, quite a literal love declaration of devotion of Li Bai to Meng Haoran, who is presumed to be quite famous. The poem says everywhere beneath heaven, but this is a typical Chinese expression. It's Tian Xia. All under heaven means the empire generally. So Li Bai declares publicly in the first couplet that he admires this person who is very well known. Perhaps not as well known in his own time as later, so there is still a little bit of the hyperbolic here. And hyperbole is Li Bai's signature. The next couplet describes very succinctly why this Master Meng should be loved and admired. In fresh-faced youth, he gave up the official cap and carriage. White-haired, he rests amid pines and clouds. So remember, the second couplet in Liu Xi is the first of the parallelistic couplets. And I think the parallelism is quite evident even in translation. So probably the first poem would be character by character, something like red-faced, youth, renounce, cap, carriage, white hair, resting. So white-haired, old, rest, pine clouds. Yeah, so there's a contrast. The idea is both when he was young and both when he was old, he had no interest in serving in office and in politics and in government. So when he was young, he gave up cap and carriage, which are the symbols of the scholar official. And now that he is white-haired, he continues with that point of view, with that attitude to life. He lives amidst pines and clouds. So out of the city as a hermit, so in the mountains, which is where the clouds were, or in the forests, or in a forested mountain. You know? So in nature anyway, away from civilization, living the good life. The next couplet, again also a parallelistic couplet, emphasizes this retired aspect of his life, putting an emphasis on the pleasures, on the things that delight Master Meng. Drunk beneath the moon, he often attains sagehood. Dazzled by flowers, he wishes to serve no lord. So again, here you can see, I think the parallelism is pretty clear. Yeah, drunk, moon, dazzled, flowers. Attain, wish. Sagehood, no lord. No lord. So, the parallelism, sage lord. The parallelism is quite evident here as well. So what does Meng Haoran do apart from searching for the truth in this hermit retired life? Well, he drinks alcohol. Remember, drinking alcohol is generally associated in China, in traditional Chinese poetry, with the attitude of not worrying about the world, of disconnecting from worldly worries, of Taoistic inclinations, of just escaping the world, like other world-escaping drugs and substances. So he is drunk under the moon, enjoying alcohol and moonlight, and he achieves a sort of illumination of sagehood in those moments of tipsy drinking and happiness. He enjoys the flowers, and he doesn't serve any lord. He is not willing to compromise his pleasures and his worldview for power or glory. So what is the conclusion? The last couplet intimates that Li Bai does not consider himself up to this model, and he can't climb this high mountain, which means he cannot be exactly like Meng Haoran, but he can try. He recognizes him as a superior in leading the retired life. How can I aspire to climb such a high mountain? Humbly I bow to his pure spirit. So Li Bai, even though he himself, could be taken as an example of the retired life, and certainly a person who drank beneath the moon and who was dazzled by flowers, Li Bai still considers, even if it's only for the purposes of a polite poem, we might imagine, of friendship, he declares himself not the equal of the poem's intended recipient. And he can't aspire to climb such a high mountain, and he bows to his pure spirit. Pure, important word. In Chinese, I think it would be Qing. And pure in Chinese has this idea, this emphasis on unsullied by the dust of the world, unsullied by ambition, idealistic. Yeah? All these sorts of connotations, which are more related to mental and philosophical detachment from the world than from crystalline clarity and things like that. In fact, in the period of disunion, a very popular activity was Qingtan, I think it was called, pure conversation, which was a conversation among scholar officials and aristocrats about philosophical topics like Taoism and so on. It was completely impractical. It was, nothing about affairs of state or government or anything. It was just enjoying rhetoric and philosophy for their sake. So Li Bai ends this poem bowing to Meng Haoran's pure spirit. So quite a nice take on the retired poem, the retired poet as an ideal. In this case, made flesh and blood by a famous poem and a famous poet, which both Li Bai and Meng Haoran we can enjoy through the pages of this anthology.